Hi there, my friend. I'm Peter Barron, and welcome to today's episode of the Independent School Moonshot Podcast. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different. Normally, I have a guest on and we go through a case study. Today, I'm going to go solo. It's going to be a solo podcast, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I have learned over the last 12 to 18 months. And, I have had the distinct honor of talking with well north of 100 heads of school about the independent school business model. I mean, at this point, I've actually lost track. I've talked to so many. And what's been interesting about it is I've been asking them, what is your take on the business model? Are you feeling stresses? Do you feel like everything is okay? Because I remember back in 2019, I had done a bunch of work on the independent school business model when I was at the Enrollment Management Association. When you would talk to schools about it, I think there were schools that were feeling stressed, but there were also a lot of schools that were saying, hey, look, we've been talking about this model being stressed for 20 years, right? Like that the business model is starting to get flexed in untenable directions, but yet we're still here. And I think that was a fair enough comment. But as I've spoken with heads over the last 12 to 18 months, what's been interesting is I'm just not hearing that anymore. Every head that I talk to is feeling some level of pressure. And, as I've gone through these conversations and I've learned more and more, I've really been able to distill it into what I call 5 stressors, right? So 5 things that schools are feeling in relation to the business model. You may be feeling 4 of the 5, 1 of the 5, 5 of the 5, it all depends. Obviously, circumstances are unique. But what I've seen are these 5. One is folks are having a heck of a time with hiring and retention. And I actually think this is the biggest indicator that the business model is feeling stress. And the reason I say that is because I think COVID was an accelerant on some of these problems, right? As we had to get more competitive. And let me just say this first off. Independent school families have never had more choice in terms of educational options than they do today. So it's just families in general, not necessarily just independent school families, but families in general. I mean, if you think about it, you've got public schools that are working really hard to retain their kids because those tax dollars can get funneled into the system, right? That's how they're funded. You have independent schools that are out there competing for students, micro schools, home schools, online schools, charter schools. There's just this abundance of options. And as a result, we as independent schools have had to really raise our value proposition. 15 years ago, when the competitive market was much thinner, it wasn't as big a concern. But today, we just have to be more competitive. And some of those competitive services that we've developed are in response to the challenges that our kids have felt coming out of COVID, right? We've had to focus on making sure that we have really top-notch SEL programs, learning support programs, making sure that we're creating cultures of belonging, all of these super important things that we've had to do, or potentially even adding a signature program. The problem is that these programs are so important, but they're not necessarily additive to revenue. So we're not charging more because we're offering these things. We're offering these things because it's the right thing to do. It's important for the students, and we have to be competitive. Now, the issue with that is this has put more pressure on our faculty. We're asking them to do more and more and more each subsequent year. And, there's the old adage that independent school faculty member wears a lot of hats. And, maybe it was the teacher, the advisor, the coach, right? But they were adding more hats on top of those traditional 3. And I think what we've seen is we've had a lot of teachers leave our industry. They're just look, it's just too much. I'm going to go find work elsewhere, or I'm going to retire, or I'm going to do any number of things. And that's okay. That's natural, right? That you're going to have that attrition. But the challenge has been it's getting harder and harder to find talent to backfill those roles. And there's some real reasons for that. I mean, one proxy is if you just look at the number of students enrolled in university education programs, those numbers have gone down over the years. There's just fewer kids that are focusing on becoming teachers. So that's a challenge. And then, if you look at Millennial and Gen Z generations, there has been this redefinition of work. And I know that there's pushback now from companies all over the country trying to bring people back into the office 5 days a week. However, there has been this expectation set that work conform to my lifestyle, not the other way around? And that means, can I work hybrid? Can I work remote? These sorts of different things. And last I checked, for an independent school, that's a really hard thing to do. You're a brick and mortar experience. You need to be there with the students 5 days a week. And so the pool of potential candidates to come backfill some of those open roles is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And all you have to do is look at LinkedIn at any moment during the year, and you're seeing job openings. Hey, I need a math teacher. I need a science teacher. In the middle of the year, you would never see those things before, but now it's commonplace. And it's all because at the end of the day, we're not making enough money to fully staff our program. So our staffing levels right now are effectively based on our current funding models, but our current funding model is meaning that our staff are having to do more and more and more, which is why we're seeing exiting, and it's becoming less attractive to prospective candidates. To me, this is the biggest red flag that the business model is challenged. We're just not making enough right now, and that's a real problem. Other things that I'm seeing, tightening credit. So if you're trying to get financing right now, you're going to be financing at a higher rate than you were, say, 5 years ago, which just means building projects are more expensive. Or if you had a short-term loan that's about to reset, you're going to see those loans set at a new rate that's significantly higher than what you maybe had 4 or 5 years ago. You have a new generation of parents, similar that we talked about the generational differences on the candidate pool. You're also seeing a new generation of parents that have different expectations of schools. So the way that I like to frame this is, if you think about baby boomers and my generation, Generation X, there's a lot of outcome-driven expectations. Where is our student going to get into college? This sort of stuff. And when you look at marketing, the way we've marketed our schools for years, we've really been dialed in to that expectation. I mean, look at any independent school website, especially if you're a high school, you're going to see college placement lists. You're going to see percentage of faculty with advanced degrees. You're going to see student-teacher ratio. You're going to see all these numbers probably on the homepage, right? Because that's been really important. But you have millennials and Gen Z who are much more values-driven versus outcome-driven. And what I mean by that, do your values as a school versus say value, but your values, do they align with our values as a family? Which means we need to be thinking differently in terms of how we market our programs. We have to get much more committed to storytelling, kind of showing, not telling, all those sorts of things. So, that's been a challenge. I actually think it's a huge opportunity, but that certainly is going to require us to think differently in terms of how we position ourselves in relation to, our market competitors. Other things that we're seeing, declining birth rates, since the Great Recession of 07, 08, literally every state in the country has seen a double-digit decline in birth rates. There just aren't as many children being born. Now, if you're in states like Florida or Texas, you've been able to offset that through migration patterns. You just have more families moving in, which has offset it. Like if you're in Florida, you're probably not experiencing, declining birth rates in any kind of way. In fact, you're probably in this era of abundance. You just have a lot of kids who are interested in your programs. And that's a very fortunate position to be in. But if you're in another part of the country, say the Northeast, the Midwest, parts of the West Coast, where families are leaving or there just aren't as many kids being born, that's a problem. We're going to have to think about how are we going to position ourselves in relation to the competition when there are just fewer kids in the pool. The last thing I'll mention, and there are other things that I've certainly learned along the way, but the last thing that I'm seeing is that we're discounting our tuition more, which means, as our price rises, we're having to discount more to be able to make our schools more affordable and accessible. And so that's a challenge. And what that ultimately is doing on an annual basis, it's just widening that gap. So if you think about tuition revenue and what it covers in terms of operating budget, right now it's about 75%. The year before it was around 79%. So we've actually seen a decline in just a year's time, according to MBOA data. They've got great data on this. And that just means the gap that we have to raise is getting bigger and bigger. So we're having to lean harder into fundraising. We're investing more in auxiliary, which I think is actually terrific. We're borrowing from our endowment, all these different ways. And it's just getting to be more challenging for schools. The gap just keeps getting wider. Okay. So one of the questions that I asked myself as I've been going through this process is why haven't we been able to solve this problem? And, when I ask heads about this, one of the questions I ask is, hey, you are now the head of a very complex organization with lots of constituent groups, lots of stakeholders. Your revenue is coming in from all these different places. Your cost structure is extraordinarily complicated. And I said, hey, at what point during your training did you receive any kind of business or entrepreneurial training? And the overwhelming majority of heads have said that just wasn't a consistent part of our leadership development. And it's not because it was intentionally ignored. It's just that, our playbook doesn't necessitate it for a long, long time versus where we are today, where this business training, I think, is extraordinarily important. So I actually see that as an opportunity. It's one of the reasons why it's one of the key reasons why I founded Moonshot OS and Moonshot Lab, which is my learning community where we're teaching these kind of business skills, all designed to help schools iterate the business model. The other thing, though, that I see is that I think that there is an opportunity to create better systems. And what I mean by systems, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but creating better internal systems in terms of how we work so that we can ultimately get to that flywheel effect that Jim Collins talks about in his classic Good to Great. I'm guessing you've probably read that. And if you haven't, it's a great read. Totally encourage you to go pick up a copy. And in fact, I really love this quote from James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits. He said, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And that is such a provocative thing to say. If you do not have good systems in terms of how you're running your organization to get to execute your vision, then it's going to make it harder and harder and harder to get there because you may have inefficiencies in there, you may have friction in order to get to, whatever that vision may be, that big vision that you put out there for your community. And so what I see here is that these challenges, if you know me, I'm a half glass full person. I'm always looking for opportunities. And so I think these challenges reveal a common opportunity for independent schools to think intentionally about how do you align your people, processes, and tools so that you're ensuring clarity, adaptability, and executing mission-driven strategy. Let me keep framing this, right? Because I think there's more to the story. So let me kind of bring it back to a context that's going to make sense for folks who are listening. So imagine you're a head of school or you're on a leadership team, and I'm willing to guess that you probably have a strategic plan that's meant to guide your school for the next 5 years. You may be a couple of years into it. You may be writing a strategic plan. You may have gone through, you may have just wrapped one up, wherever you are in that process. And you've probably identified 4 or 5 core pillars. Common ones are academic excellence, financial sustainability, campus improvement, teacher recruitment and retention. And then underneath those priorities, you may have several goals. And underneath those goals, you may have several initiatives, right? I'm guessing this probably sounds familiar. But as we all know, life happens. So emergencies crop up. You have day-to-day fires that demand your attention. And before long, all these carefully crafted initiatives aren't necessarily getting the traction that you hope for. I just heard this multiple times, but it doesn't have to be that way. And this is where I think, creating systems can be very helpful. So I want to introduce you to something. I want to introduce you to a framework that I've developed called the School Operating System. Or SOS. Don't worry, it's not complicated. It's really a simple, proven way to help you execute those big ideas and keep everyone aligned. And in fact, this came out of me getting trained in this methodology called Top Teams, which is really what this is all rooted and based in, right? So I've got this training, certification. Now I've kind of molded it into the school operating system for independent schools. And we know, and this isn't, again, not a surprise, schools are busy places. You've got faculty, staff, parents, board, donors. It's natural for the day-to-day work to overshadow even the best laid strategic plans. And so if you think about enrollment pressures, maybe there are budget constraints, you have staffing changes, it can feel really hard to get that consistent attention that the strategic plan deserves. And I get it. When you're juggling 20 initiatives, like literally 20 initiatives, sometimes you just don't know where to put your time. I've spoken with heads of schools who have spent months creating these beautifully designed strategic plans, right? You bring your community together and you think very strategically about what is the vision and how are we going to get there. And yet, I've also had these conversations where they're like, Peter, I just don't feel like we're making the progress that we want to. We're just not getting the traction that we feel we need based on the strategic plan. And it's because there's just a lot going on and it's really hard, especially when you have all these different initiatives. And let me frame it just a little bit more and let's just do some simple math. So let's say you have 5 strategic priorities, right? And underneath each of those strategic priorities, maybe there are 4 goals. And then underneath those 4 goals, each goal has 6 initiatives. If you do the math, if you just look at the total number of initiatives, if that's your structure, and you can do this too, right? Like figure out how many priorities you have, how many goals per priority, and how many initiatives per goal. But if we go with 5 strategic priorities, 4 goals per priority, and then 6 initiatives per goal, that's 120 initiatives. Now, I get it. You're thinking about this over a 5-year time span. Totally understand. But still, that's a lot for any organization to take on, especially when you have the day-to-day running of the school. And I think this is where a school operating system can help. And I'm not saying that it's a magic wand, right? It's more like the operating system on your phone. Like we're all familiar with iOS. A new version of it comes out every year, whether you're on Apple or Android or what have you. But it's the system that quietly coordinates all of your apps. So in the case of the strategic plan, swipe apps for strategic priorities, all these things in the background so nothing gets lost, right? It coordinates all of your apps in the background so nothing gets lost. And if you're worried that, Peter, are you telling me that there's more that I need to do? Is this more unnecessary work? Don't be. A school operating system is about simplification, not about complication. And what I like to say is that it helps reduce the noise. And I say that because what it allows you to do is spend less time in, say, endless meetings and more time moving the school forward. And there are really 3 main components to it. One is there are clear priorities. So instead of 20 initiatives that you feel like you have to focus on at any given moment, are you focusing on the ones that truly matter right now? It's about creating weekly rhythms so you have really tight leadership meetings that are keeping progress visible and manageable and holding people accountable. And then it's about creating scorecards and making sure that you're tracking the data that matters the most so that you understand, are you making progress? Do you have to course correct? You're just keeping tabs and creating accountability around the entire thing. And so let me tell you a little bit about the cadence, right? And I think this will help create the picture a little bit clearer. So if you think about your vision, right? So you have your strategic plan, you create your vision. That's your North Star. It's the big vision for the future. It's the thing that everybody in your community understands. This is where we're going. And then what you would do is take that and say, all right, let's say our vision is a 5-year vision or a 10-year vision, whatever it may be. Let's say it's a 5-year vision. Okay, well, what we need to do is figure out, what is the 3-year plan that operationalizes the strategic plan based on your main pillars? So where are we going to be in 3 years according to what we set forth in our vision? This is where it gets really important. Then you need to dial in your 1-year plan. Like what's realistic, what's mission critical for the coming year according to our strategic plan. And you have to be okay with the fact that not everything will happen at once. You just don't have enough capacity to do that. So you have to dial in on the priorities that truly move the needle. So that's great. All right. We have our vision. We now know where we want to be in 3 years. We know where we're going to be in the next 12 months. But this is where it gets really important. Then you need to take that year and you need to chunk it into 90-day goals. So you break that 1-year plan into 90-day goals. These are shorter sprints. They help your team build momentum and see the quick wins rather than waiting months for progress, right? So we're going to backward engineer where we want to be in 12 months into 4 90-day increments that allows us to really stay attuned to holding people accountable, making sure that we're making the progress and tracking the data that matters. Now, where the magic really happens is during those weekly meetings where you use those check-ins and they become laser focused. Did we hit our 90-day milestones? Where are we stuck? Who needs help? Then at the end of each 90 days, you're going to go back and you're going to review how the last 90 days go. And then you're going to look forward and say, okay, what are we doing in the next 90 days? Then when you get to the year and you've completed that 1-year plan, you're going to take a look back and process what happened. But you're also going to recognize that at the end of that year, things are likely changed. Maybe you have new team members coming onto the leadership team. Perhaps there's shifts in enrollment. There are market conditions that you have to respond to. This is where being fluid is really important and not being where I think rigid can kind of hold you back. So what I advocate is, all right, great. You just went through this 1-year plan. It's done. You still have that 3-year plan in front of you. I say throw that 3-year plan out and write a new 3-year plan, because inevitably things have changed on the ground. And you want to make sure that you're still pointing in the right direction based on all of the pressures that are surrounding you. And over time, this kind of fluidity tied to vision that helps you figure out, where do we want to be in 3 years? What are we going to do in this year? And what are we going to do over 4 90-day increments? And how are we going to track this weekly? Over time, what this does is it creates a flywheel effect. Again, coming back to Jim Collins, and each cycle builds on the last and keeps everyone aligned and ensures that the strategic plan is always relevant. Because I like to think of the strategic plan as something that's woven into the DNA of the school. You've dedicated all this time and resources to understanding, where do we want to be in 5 years? What is the vision that we want to communicate out into the community? It's critical that that becomes part of your way of running the institution. And SOS ensures this. It ensures that the strategic plan isn't just a document, but that we do weave it into that DNA, and that it's a living, breathing roadmap that you update weekly. And one of the biggest wins in all of this is that when you stay focused, it allows your community to see where you're going. It allows teachers to understand what's happening at the leadership level, what's happening in terms of how you're executing vision, and it creates a sense of transparency that's really important to healthy communities. And, at the end of the day, people want to be part of solutions. And when they can see progress or even a dip, right? Not everything's going to be perfect. You're going to have some downward dips. But when you can create this kind of virtuous cycle that people can see progress, they can understand if you're being set back a little bit, it reduces anxiety and fosters collaboration. So just to recap as I wrap up this solo pod, so we've looked at why strategic plans stall. We looked at how a school operating system can keep them moving forward through your weekly meetings, through scorecards, through your annual 90-day cadence. All of this kind of really propels that flywheel forward. If you're feeling overwhelmed by all this, you're like, oh my gosh, Peter, this is too much. I can't handle it. Where do I even begin to start? Here's what I recommend. Create a priority that as a leadership team, you're going to track over the next 90 days, and then track it weekly. This is what we want to accomplish in the next 90 days as a leadership team. What are the metrics that are associated with it that will allow us to understand if this is successful or not? And then let's track it over the next 90 days to see where we are. It creates accountability. It creates trust. It creates that flywheel effect that we've talked about. And I guarantee you that if you do that one simple thing, you'll be amazed at how much progress you make over that 90-day period. All right, my friends, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you tried these kind of short sprints? Are you doing annual refreshes? Couple ways that you can get a hold of me. You can email me. My information is on moonshotos.com, or you can just message me through LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time. Happy to engage with you there. And if this has helped you, I appreciate if you would share this podcast with somebody else. I would love to spread the word and have as many people thinking about how do I build systems that are effective, that help us execute our strategic plan. All right, my friend, thank you so much for listening, and I wish you nothing but the best.